Hey everybody, this is Pastor Matthew Best. It is Tuesday, July 7th. I just had to check the calendar there. And it is time for our Tough Topic Tuesday. And this is where I take some time and just talk about a tough topic, because we should be talking about tough topics. And so we've done a variety of different things. Just so you know, going forward, if you want to continue to watch the Tough Topic Tuesdays, I'll invite you to like our church page, because that's what we'll do it from. You can find it at St. Stephen Evangelical Lutheran Church, New Kingstown, on Facebook, and then you'll still be able to see the recording. I'll put it on my own and on my own webpage, pastormatthewbest.com. Anyway, a Tough Topic Tuesday for today has to do with politics and faith. Ooh, I touched the topic that nobody ever wants to talk about, that everybody complains that there's too much politics in church and all this other type of stuff, right? Yeah, let's talk about this topic, because it's an important topic. So a couple things that I think are really important are definitions, because when people talk about the fact that they don't want politics in church, I always have to ask the question of, how are you defining that? I think it's really important that we define terms. So what is politics, and what is it that people are really saying? I think there's a difference between those two type of things. People are lumping everything together into a term called politics without really understanding what politics is. I think what people are really upset about is partisanship in the church. And that's different. Partisanship and politics are not the same thing. That's a really important distinction that I think we need to grab hold of and separate the two, because they are not the same. There are overlap between the two, because politics and partisanship can overlap with each other, but they are not the same thing. Partisanship is loyalty to a political party. That's as simple as it can possibly be. Politics, on the other hand, is a tool. Politics is nothing more than simply a group of people coming together to figure out how they're going to make decisions. That's it. That's all politics is. Partisanship is about loyalty to political parties. And oftentimes, political parties exist in order to get their members into some kind of position of political power. That's a part of what it is. Partisanship can use politics in order to accomplish its goals, but the two are not completely overlapping with each other. So I think the beginning of this topic has to be those definitions. And so when I hear people say that they don't like politics in the pulpit or politics in church, I don't think they really mean politics in church. I think they mean partisanship in church. And you know what? I completely agree. Jesus, first of all, wasn't an American. Jesus wouldn't be part of either party. I'm sorry to inform some folks this, but that would be ridiculous. And part of the reason why that would be ridiculous is he was never part of the Roman Empire or the temple authorities, which were, in Jesus' time, the two partisan parties that existed for him. I find it ironic that people can be so partisan and turn it into an idol. Partisanship can turn into an idol. And yet, for what? That's the real question that we have to ask. For what? Is our identity wrapped up in our partisan loyalty, or is it wrapped up in something else? And if we're Christians, then our identity is wrapped up in Jesus, following Jesus. That's the way it's supposed to be, right? And so then we have to take a look and think, does our faith have some kind of public impact? Does it have a political impact? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely, it has a political impact. Does it have a partisan impact? That's something different. Jesus is not loyal to a political party. Number one, political parties come and go. At some point, the Democrat and the Republican parties will go out of existence. And as far as I'm concerned, not soon enough. But unfortunately, they'll be replaced with something else, and people will have their diehard loyalty to those things, and they will not see any type of, they'll have cognitive dissonance over a party one day arguing one thing and then completely switching and arguing the exact opposite, which is what has happened in the history of the Republican and Democrat parties. Both parties have done this. They continue to do this today. So I think there's some basic things that we really need to understand. And so the question that we have to look at is, when we talk about politics and faith, is there a public impact to our faith? The answer is yes, of course there is. Why? Because if we're talking about Jesus having a transformation of the world, of our lives, then that automatically has some kind of public impact on the world. It has an impact on how we relate with others, right? If God is ultimately about shalom, which is an Old Testament, it's a Hebrew concept called wholeness, then that has a public impact. That has an impact on our relationships with others. That has an impact on how we treat others. You look at the Old Testament, there's all sorts of rules about interactions with others, right? And how we're supposed to interact. The sanctuary rules of the Old Testament have to do with that. Those are political because they have an impact on other people. So here's a question. When we hear something that we don't like in church, the question we have to ask is what's being said associated primarily with a political party, or is it associated with what God has always been saying? That's the real question. And unfortunately, we're going to find things that we don't like what God is saying. And it's really easy to say, oh, that's just politics in church. But maybe it's God's politics. So to give you an example of this, to be against racism doesn't associate you with a political party. To be against racism is to say, gosh, this is an injustice. It's wrong. Yeah, it's been going on for a long, long time. But God values people. That God has been talking about valuing all people for a really long time. We see it in the Old Testament. We see it in the New Testament. We see Paul writing about, where is it? I want to say Galatians 3:28. I don't remember exactly. In Christ there is no Gentile or Jew, servant or free, male and female, those type of things, right? For God so loved the cosmos. That's John 3:16, right? So is that a partisan thing? Is racism a partisan thing? Or is it a justice thing? There's a difference. Wearing a mask, that could be its own tough topic, right? Wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, is that a partisan thing? I know in our society we like to turn everything into partisan loyalties, which frankly is pretty stupid. And it's not helpful for anybody at all, because your partisan loyalty isn't going to save you. Sorry, Jesus doesn't work through politicians to accomplish God's will. We don't have, Jesus already accomplished everything that needs to be accomplished. So our saviors are not in politicians. I know I'm touching idols at this point, but whatever. So wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, is that a partisan thing? I know we're trying to make it, we're really putting a lot of effort into making that a partisan thing. But here's the thing, if you're following Jesus, and then Jesus talks about loving your neighbor and seeing the image of God, which is also an Old Testament and Hebrew idea and all these type of things, then you wear a mask in order to show that you actually love your neighbor. That's all it is. That's it. Plain and simple. No agenda beyond God's agenda. Is it, let's see, other topics that would be considered political would be the poor and the homeless, right? Is ending poverty and homelessness a partisan issue? No, it's a matter of, because we love our neighbor, that we want to do things to actually help. How about creation care? Is that a partisan issue? Well, considering that God has called us to be stewards, I don't really think that that's a partisan issue either. Are there ways in which these things play out in partisan ways? Sure, absolutely there are, right? Because this is our process in which we do things. But what I'm saying is a loyalty that goes above what our Christian identity is a problem. And that's not a way that God works. I mean, ultimately, again, these parties are going to go out of existence. So it doesn't make any sense to have an undying loyalty to any of these political parties. They'll just go out, they'll be gone, and they'll be replaced with something else, and you'll continue on the cycle. Our loyalty and our identity and our allegiance is to Jesus if we're Christians. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Again, the beginning, the definition is really important to understand what is politics versus what is partisanship, because there is a significant difference between those two things. And then to get to the idea that we should look at things through the lens of God if we're followers of God. To say, is this a God thing? Maybe God doesn't match up with our partisan loyalty. You think that might be possible? That we're not the center of the universe? That we don't get to determine what's right and wrong? That maybe our ways aren't the right ways? The question becomes, are we called to re-examine our beliefs based on what we hear from God? Or are we called to spin God and what God stands for to match up with what we want? That's what happens in partisanship. So we spin God. We ignore certain things. Perfect example. I hear people cry out about Romans 13 when it comes to certain sets of laws. Romans 13 is Paul's writing about obey the government. It's one of the most abused scriptures in all of history. Romans 13, we should obey the government. And then when it comes to something that doesn't fit our agenda, nobody talks about Romans 13 anymore. That would be partisanship in church, because it's blatantly using God to accomplish your own purposes and your own agenda. It's ignoring the context. It's using God as a tool for your own political agenda, your own partisan agenda. And that's not the proper way to go about things. So anyway, so there's your tough topic. You might like it, hate it. You might have different definitions of what politics and partisanship is. I'm giving you what my definitions are. I'm giving you what my experience has been. I'm giving you the idea that just because you talk about something in church or through the lens of faith doesn't mean that it's partisan. Yeah, it's political, because ultimately, if you think about this, the prophets were extremely political, and a lot of them died because they gave a message to their kings that the kings did not like. Jesus was political. The title that he was born with was King of the Jews, which is a political title. And as a result of his political title, Herod, the other king of the Jews, slaughtered children in Bethlehem. At the end of Jesus' earthly life, the label King of the Jews was put above the crucifix, which was also a political title. And he was killed by a political entity, Rome, which had a threat. Jesus was a political threat to Rome. You could go on with all these type of things. So, but again, there's a difference between politics and partisanship. If you get nothing else out of this, I hope that's what you get out of it. We can disagree about topics. We can disagree about how to accomplish certain things. I think that's really important too, is to say that what is it that we have in common? what is our goal? Is our goal to end homelessness? I think most people would say, yeah, that's probably a good thing. Is our goal to end racism? Yeah, that's probably a good thing. I think a lot of people are going to be on board with these type of things. If we start with a commonality and we say, what is our end goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And then we say, okay, let's talk about how we get there. What's the most Christ-like way to get there? And we stop focusing on how it benefits one political party or the other and all this other junk that goes on. I think we'll make a lot more progress in a lot of things. And I think we can do that if we're looking through the lens of faith. If our lens of faith is the most important thing, as opposed to our lens of partisanship, we're going to be in a lot better shape. We're going to be better as a community of people. We'll be better as a nation. We'll be better as individuals because our focus will be matched up with what our true identity is supposed to be, which is identifying with Christ. So that's our tough topic for today. I hope it's been challenging. I hope it's tough. I hope it pokes you. And I thank you for the comments. I know a lot of you have been commenting throughout this. And I hope you have a wonderful and blessed week. Bye.